Next speaker is Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Mágad agus fáilte over that. Congratulations, Mr. Barry. You were nominated by the government and approved by the Health Committee, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, there was no interview process, it was a nomination plus an approval. Yes. Thank you. Now, we're back here, Mr. Barry, because quite clearly there's been a huge overspend, isn't that right? None of us want to be here. Certainly we don't as members of the Public Accounts Committee. So you gave us an opening statement today, and I wish you the best. You've given us an opening statement of 4 pages, and you really haven't you've given us a history lesson, partly, and you've outlined things that happened, and we know that that's why we're here, and that's why we have this report that cost £500,000. Okay, so I would expect more than just a little paragraph on telling me what you're going to do. I'll tell you why, and I'm not personalising it. Before my time, before the Public Accounts Committee, the board appeared and said this hospital is going to cost 650 million price. And we assure you, all members, that everything is in place. Governance, risk assessment, the whole lot. That was 15, prior to your time, prior to my time. On the last occasion, the board came before us and they assured us everything was in place. Everything was in place. And it takes PwC, which I'll come back to tell us everything wasn't in place. Now, presumably, you've all read it. What did you think of the report?
Well,
in terms of its findings now, I'm not asking for any personal dive.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think in terms of its recommendations...
Yeah. What did you think of its findings?
Well, the recommendations are the key thing, I suppose, that I was focused on.
What did you think of its findings, please? Well, let me help you. Just let me help you. The definitive business case was faulty, inaccurate. Okay? Definitive. The project, the PEP, what's that again? The project... What's a PEP again? Sorry.
Project execution.
Thank you. Faulty. Faulty. Reporting back. Faulty. Failure to challenge by the board. Not able to challenge. A competency-based board but unable to challenge what was coming up. An undue reliance on a design team and so on. All of that identified. Was any of that identified by the board prior to this?
I would say yes.
Good. Where?
Well, the board brought in Mazars towards the end of last year to help them, to help them do better, basically.
Yes.
And Mazars came out with the recommendations and suggestions, and the board was already acting on these before the PwC investigation came along.
So the Mazars Internal Audit Service, to close out the review of the guaranteed maximum price, was November 18. Review of business continuity and disaster recovery, which is an aptly titled document. Review of business continuity and disaster recovery. That's Mazars. Where else did Mazars say something?
Mazars gave advice on organisation.
Very good. Okay, just you can imagine where we're coming from here in terms of a board, competency, and honestly, I'm not wishing here to be critical at all, but we're up, I come back to the department as to what this is going to cost. We're up at what, 1.7 billion, is it, at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, and just to take focus off you for a minute, Mr. Barry, we're up at that price. That doesn't include an educational centre, does it, Mr. Breslin? Research, does that include accommodation?
1.7 does, yes.
What does it include?
So it includes all of the construction costs.
Oh, I know all that. In addition, what does it? It builds a hospital. Does it equip it completely with everything besides the basic beds?
So it includes equipping.
Yeah. What does equipping mean? Does that all of the IT?
So if I go through it, then so it includes equipping. Yeah. It also includes ICT. Yeah. It includes an electronic health record.
Yeah. So I've the list. I have the list.
It includes the research and education centre.
Okay.
And it also includes the costs that were incurred on the Matter site.
Okay. So maybe it might be simpler to say, actually that reminds me of what was written down, of course. What was the price that was written down on the previous tobacco? 35 million that was written off. What's not included? Because I'm confused at this stage with Secretary Generals, and I have the greatest of respect for them, as to what the final cost is. I think we had somebody before us that couldn't answer in relation to a 2 billion cost. So what does that list not include?
So the PwC, who were asked to look at this, and they set it out from page 70 of the report.
Yes.
They set out the risks. They're not crystallised. They're not.
I understand that.
There at the moment.
I understand that.
But the management of them will determine
absolutely,
the full
like the management
cost of this.
Absolutely, like
and one of them which is excluded from the contract is construction inflation if it were to exceed 4%.
I understand all of those, and they should have all been identified before, and that's okay. So that's what the report is telling us. They weren't. And there's an optimism bias and all of this other lovely language that led to huge increases in costs. My question to you today, what figure has the department for a hospital that will be up and running, in addition to what you're telling us today? What's besides the risks, what's not included in the hospital?
So, but the risks are the exclusions.
That's all?
Yes.
There's nothing else? So any additional price to the 1.7 million will be to do with what's built in, to deal with optimism bias, to deal with risks, to deal with various...
and in particular the risks as identified in the PwC report, which are enumerated, where they can be quantified, such as in the inflation, a scenario is set out to quantify them. But some of them are not quantifiable.
Fine, but everything else is included?
Yes.
Okay. The accommodation for children, for the families, is that included?
The accommodation is in cooperation with the Ronald McDonald charity, and that's identified as a risk, because if they can't fundraise to the extent of the cost of that, that is a risk, and it's set out in the PwC report.
So Ronald McDonald is going to provide accommodation for our sick.
They do that the world over in children's paediatric
That's lovely. It's very reassuring that we're almost spending out $2 billion of taxpayers' money, and we're going to rely on Ronald McDonald.
It's important that the voluntary sector is part of this initiative. They are on the Crumlin site as well as we speak.
Let me just say, I have limited time, and that's only my own personal thing. I'll stick to facts, but it certainly doesn't really help me to think that Ronald McDonald is going to provide accommodation. So just explain to me, what is the state providing for accommodation?
So the major development in this hospital is that every child will be in a single room, where there will be room for the parent to stay with the child overnight.
Please, listen to me, we're not going to deal with the wonders of the hospital. I'm asking you,
but that is important in accommodating a carer throughout the night, which can't be done in the existing hospital.
I've no difficulty with that. Please, I'm a mother, I have no difficulty, and I'm sure the Health Committee will tease it out more. My job is to tease out, what is the state paying for accommodation along with Ronnie McDonald?
So there will be a partnership with Ronald McDonald Charity to deliver the patient accommodation, the parent accommodation.
What will the state be paying? What's ring-fenced for accommodation?
So originally the proposition from the charity was that they would deliver that in full, and at this stage they have come forward to say they would want a contribution from the state towards that. I think the figure that's been talked about at the moment is to a maximum of about 10 million, but it does depend on their ability to fundraise for it.
So we've gone through all of this and these costs, and we didn't put in our plan to provide for accommodation. We utterly relied on a charity. Now that charity is coming back and saying we're not so charitable and we need a contribution from the government. Is that correct?
Yes, but this is a model the world over that charities are used as part of the...
I only want the facts. We'll discuss the models all over. So 10 million to start with is the contribution being asked for, and possibly more.
They're the facts.
Possibly more, is that a fact?
It is subject to the fundraising of the charity.
I see. And when will that be finalised? When will the figure be finalised?
So the planning permission for that is in place, but the actual construction of that facility will be at the back end. So we will work with the charity over the intervening period to assist in delivering that solution.
So planning application is all done and dusted?
We don't need to do it now because it's a lot more low tech than the main hospital.
In relation to tri-location, that's included in the accounts at the beginning. The tri-location, to have a maternity hospital there as well. Is that included in the 2018 accounts as an objective?
No, the Development Board has been established to deliver the children's hospital.
I know, I understand all of that.
So there wouldn't be any...
No, just stay with me a second, please. I have a very limited time. I'm not...
The answer is no, Deputy.
Oh, no, well, maybe I put my question sort of badly, because in the accounts from that board, it talks about a tri-location in the 2017 accounts. It refers to it.
It may refer to it, but I don't believe that would involve spending money on it.
No, that's okay. I didn't ask a single thing about money. I asked about tri-location. And under design, on page It's hard to see the page. Anyway, consultation is the start. Design. The following hospital facilities are required to deliver high-quality, child-centred and family-focused services. Number 1, bullet point, the new Children's Hospital will be tri-located with adult and maternity hospitals on a shared campus. Now, my question is that bullet point included in the 2018 accounts?
So when you say included in the accounts, yeah. I read that to be, is there money spent in 2017 recorded in the accounts? And my answer is no.
I heard that, and I'm repeating the question to the board. Is that included in your 18 accounts, that bullet point on a tri-location? Now, you might check and come back. That's all. It's there.
Yes, but I would just reinforce what Mr. Breslin has said. The accounts for the Development Board are not going to include... No,
Mr. Barry, please. No, Mr. Barry, honestly, I've only a short while. I really don't mean to be abrupt. I'm asking specific factual questions. I don't need you to repeat what Mr. Breslin has just said. I've simply asked a factual question.
Well, there are accounts, and they will not include any money.
I didn't ask that question. I asked, was it included as a...
You're asking, are the words included?
Well, the words are extremely important.
Yes,
they're down as a but I'm not asking you, Mr. Breslin. I'm asking the board because they're the accounts of the board.
Yeah, the accounts for 2018 haven't been finalised.
I didn't ask you that, please. Sorry, I asked you, was the bullet point for tri-location included? That's all. If you don't know, please come back through the chair.
Well,
that's
sorry,
it.
The accounts haven't been finished yet.
So I didn't ask about the accounts. I didn't ask about the figures. I asked, is it included down as it is in the 17 accounts at the beginning as a bullet point?
We haven't finalised the bullet points either.
Oh, very good. Okay, well, so you might come back.
So we haven't got to that point yet.
In relation to the definitive business case, who carried out that? Who carried out the business case originally and then the definitive business case? And I see costs in your business case development, 245,000 back in 16. Then I see business case development, 43,474. Who did it? What's the total cost? And this is a definitive business case that has been highlighted as being inaccurate, I think. I'll be careful with my words and come back exactly on the words of the business case. Who did it? What was the total cost?
EY prepared the business case.
Who's that?
Ernst & Young.
Thank you very much.
Prepared the business case based on a tender that we completed.
Very good. And did they update that business case then, did they? Were they in from the beginning doing a business case and then it became the definitive business case? Is that right?
Yes, they did a draft business case in 2016 and that was finalised in 2017.
What's the total figure gone for that definitive business case, please?
In terms of the figure...
Yeah. Well, look, again, Chair, just so I'll save time. Can I just, through you, get a total cost for the definitive business case that went to Ernst & Young? Is that possible? Yes. Okay. Yes, so, and the reason I'm raising that is because on page 28 of this report that cost $500,000, the definitive business case overstated the completeness of the design and understated the risks. And it goes on to highlight this was factually incorrect, and in fact, when the definitive business case was approved in April 17, stage 2 design had been underway for 11 months. So it's correcting, it's saying it was factually incorrect. It says a number of other things about it as well, so I would like to know the cost of that. In relation to the board itself, sorry, the actual words, because I said I'd be precise, the definitive business case has material errors. Okay.
What page are you on?
I think this is page 26.
Oh, 26.
Page 26. There are different pages. I'm quoting from page 28.
Okay.
There are many pages on this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
How many private beds and private rooms will be in the hospital? Mr. Breslin, could you answer that?
There are no private beds in the hospital.
Thank you very much. No private beds?
No, and there is a facility for, within the plans, there's a facility for a small private clinic area, which has, I'm almost certain, 8 consulting rooms. And this has been put in accordance with the contract which was in place at the time. Well, it is still the consultant contract, which entitles consultants to do private outpatient practice on site of a public hospital, and for that reason that is included
So there's a small clinic area
Yeah.
for 8 consultants.
8 rooms.
8 rooms
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a number of consultants.
They could be used by a number of consultants. Yes, they could be used by.
And that's a legacy from the contract that was there with the
Well,
consultant?
no, the consultant contract continues to provide that provision. So
I
that is
understand
the
that, but there are
current.
different consultant contracts. So this is the one contract where they're allowed to do private work
Yes.
in a public hospital.
That is correct.
So in that sense, it's a legacy from what was there, and then it was copper fastened in a contract. When it's not
I'm
very,
sorry, I don't
it's not
understand.
very hard.
There is a consultant contract
Yes.
that allows consultants to
I understand
do
that.
private practice.
There are a number of consultant contracts.
Mm-hmm.
This particular contract allows private consultants to do private
Yes.
work in a public hospital.
So it is recognition of that
Of that, what's in their
entitlement.
contract. So a special area is being provided to them.
It's a small area down on the outpatient floor where there are 8 consulting rooms.
Provided for in their contract to do private work in a public hospital.
But if that does
Yes.
function as a private clinic,
Yes.
there will be a charge for it. It will not be freely available.
Has the charge been worked out?
Not that I am aware of.
No. There's no accommodation, and we're reliant on Ronnie MacDonald. It's interesting, but okay, thank you for clarifying that. In relation to communications, which stood out the last time, really jumped out at me, Mr. Barry, you might look at this as the new chair, the cost of PR companies to sell the good news. Have you looked at those in the accounts for 2017 and 18?
Well,
Have you looked at...
I have looked at what
Good.
we're doing on communications
Yes.
and the need for communications.
Yes.
And we have a lot to do, I suppose, a lot of work to do with the resident community in the area.
No, listen to me, Mr. Barry. Please, no, listen to me. I know the history and I know about working with residents, and it's very important. This is the board's second time before us. The consultancy fees for a PR company. Have you an up-to-date on what was paid to them? I'm looking at presumably it's under communications.
Yes.
Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. So under communications, there was 267,000 in 16. In 17, under communications, can't see it. Somebody might help me. Here it is. Yeah, 288,000. Yeah, very good. That's 17. In 18, what were we paying for communications to tell the good story?
It's a similar amount, 279.
Great. And that is a contract. I think
That's a tendered contract.
Thanks to the
yes.
Times, that has emerged. That didn't emerge here. That emerged as a
The
follow-up.
record, Deputy, that excludes VAT. The figure for 2017, including VAT, is 353,000.
Sweet Jesus. Could anybody tell me, please, the length of the contract with the PR company, who's the PR company, and the total cost, please?
We will, to make sure we get it right, we will send in a note with all of that information.
Mr. Barry, thank you. But it would be helpful if it was here today, because, again, it's communications. That's what we're doing here. We want facts. We're looking at costs and how to avoid them. So it really would be very helpful. Then, in relation to the rented building, I asked this and I just forget. You're renting a building as a board, isn't that right? Where is that again?
It's just across from the new hospital that's been built.
Okay. And what lease is there?
Their initial lease was for 3 years, which
3
is
years.
just expiring.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we're in the process of finalising a lease for the next
for how long?
to 2023.
2023, and then you won't be leasing it anymore after that?
No, there's the board.
Oh, that's marvellous. And when can we get a figure on that, on those as well?
Yes.
Okay. I think I'm coming near the end of my time, so I just wanted to ask in relation to PwC. Now, Mr. Breslin, you sent us a little, I wouldn't call it a love note, but a detailed note in relation.
I said the deputy, but yes, I know what you're referring to.
HSE, I actually sent it. Was it the HSE, I think, sent it?
Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon. The HSE. It's unusual to get love notes from the HSE. Anyway, this list here from the board gave us a list, and again, it was something that was extracted rather than reactive, rather than given proactively. And we got a list: design, build and equip, and the various reports. The last one was an internal report in November 18. Mr. Barry, would you be aware of that internal report, what it cost and who was involved in it?
Well, again, to make sure that we get everything just right,
Lovely.
we will include that in the
Okay,
note.
does anybody else from the board know about this internal report? In fairness to Mr. Barry, he's new. Okay. Does anyone have a cost for this? Mr. Farrer, are you fine on that?
Perhaps you might mention again what is the report? I'm just not quite clear. It's a PwC report.
I'm not quite clear either. I got this from you, so did everybody else. The heading, listing of independent and internal corporate reports relating to reviews, examinations and so on, from 17 to 18. There's a list, and then finally internal report, process to guaranteed maximum price.
That was the report that was completed by Ms. Ayres, again, to review the process that we were undergoing to deliver the prices that you have in front of you.
Just to be fair to you now, Mr. Farrer, it's called an internal report.
Yeah, but it's internal audit, the group that did it, yes. It's Ms. Ayres' report. Yes.
Are you sure of that?
I'm not. If it's different, we'll correct it, right? But I believe it is.
Yeah, I understood that. Sorry.
It may be a terminology. My understanding is that they were acting as internal auditors.
Auditors, yes.
For the, it's an outsourced internal audit function.
Yes, exactly. It's outsourced internal audit. Yes.
It is outsourced, which is your point, and there was an expense associated with it.
I'm not sure now what my point is. I'm trying to find out what the report was in November 18. I understood that was the report where you looked at, will we go forward or not? Prices are rising, rising, rising. Are we going to go forward? And I understand that you commissioned a number of high-stake or high-worth companies, including PwC, to come in and advise you. Is that the report, or am I mixed up?
This was a report that was reviewed based on, and it outlined the development of the cost of the 1433, and it reviewed the process.
Mr. Farrer, so was this Ms. Ayres that ran this report, please? You're sure of that now?
Well, if it's not, as I said, I'll correct it.
Sorry,
right?
yeah, please.
I give you my best view on this, and based on the page that you've got, the first report mentioned Ms. Ayres' internal audit services to close out the review of the GMP process. That's Ms. Ayres, the internal auditors, and that's 23,000.
The last one
The last one was done by the Development Board itself.
That's right.
And you've also got that report, and it informed the decision that was made to proceed.
So now, Mr. Farrer, we've had it corrected, and this was one ye commissioned yourself.
This is a GMP report we call it.
No, listen, please, now, this is extremely important because this was the one that justified you going forward. You couldn't go back, had to go forward. Isn't that right? This was the very one that the recommendation you gave to government, and the government or the department followed that advice. So who was involved in that internal report where you couldn't go backwards or take a different option?
Basically, the primary lead was one of our QSs that works for the Development Board.
Who's that?
I think we mentioned earlier, I think, that we shouldn't mention names.
Oh, no, listen to me. PwC were involved in this. Let's have a list of the names.
Oh, no, this is an internal person. This is an employee.
Okay, I'm not interested in names, please.
Sorry, okay.
If for November, if you could stop obfuscating, and I apologise if you're not, but that's what it seems to me. A report was done. PwC was part of that report, including other advisors from Northern Ireland.
No, not in that report.
Well, where is the next one?
I clarify, please, Deputy. This list is a list of Development Board reports.
Yeah, I understand the development.
What you're interested in is the report that was commissioned, the work that was undertaken by the HSE, not the Development Board.
Okay.
When the GMP process was concluded, and the Development Board put their report together and gave it to the HSE and to the department, the HSE undertook a piece of analysis of that, and they involved external expertise in that.
Thank you very much. So now, that's very good. So now we have the external, and that included PwC.
It did.
And Northern Ireland advisors and other ones. And then they came up with a report that said, we've looked at this, and really you have to go ahead with it. You have to go ahead with it. Isn't that right?
There was no they, Deputy. The Secretary General wrote to the HSE and said, on receipt of the GMP report and the three options that are identified there, and the one option which is recommended as a way forward, which is stick with BAM as the main contractor, the Secretary General wrote to me and asked us for advice on two things, one of which was what lessons were they in terms of understanding what had happened to get to the place that we were, and the other thing that he asked me to look at was how should we now proceed. I wrote back to the Secretary General 6 days later and said it would only be possible to look at the latter of those, which is
Mr.
what's
Sullivan,
the best way of
that's
proceeding.
okay. I'm not questioning that at this point. They're facts, and then you're given a factual analysis. What I'm asking for is that PwC was involved at that point.
PwC were one of the advisors into the HSE's advice to the Department Deputy. Yes,
I've said that
that's
now
correct.
5 times.
Good.
So PwC were involved, and you've told us, or the HSE have told us, they weren't involved in the decision-making process. I would hope they weren't. We didn't need to be told that. They were brought in as advisors. My question is then, they come up with a conclusion, or they help ye to come up with a conclusion. And that same PwC are then employed as an independent company again in January for $500,000 or thereabouts to come up with the same conclusion. No?
No.
Okay.
Well, I know we might disagree, but let me at least tell you what I think happened.
Yeah.
So we were in a very short, constrained period in which a decision had to be made whether to award the contract or not. I had 2 concerns, one of which was how did we get here, and the other was what are the next steps, what's the best next step to take. The Mazars report, which you've referred to, was conducted by the Development Board, and that told us how we got here. I wasn't satisfied that that would be the final word on the subject, because Mazars are the internal auditors to the Development Board. So it would have been nice to have somebody externally look at that. But as was just said by Mr. O'Sullivan, he said to me, that's not possible in the time available. There's just too much work involved in that.
So you're explaining and justifying something that I'm not asking at this point. I'm simply...
But what I am explaining is that there's 2 different jobs that PwC have done.
No, we might come to that now in a minute, and the Chair will have more time to tease out that. But at this point, the PwC made a conclusion in November. They made a similar conclusion that they weren't asked for, in fact, by their terms of reference.
That's a good point.
Well, I'm delighted, Mr. Breslin. I'm glad I made one good point.
No, it is a good point.
Yeah.
It's been missed, but it is a good point.
Yeah. So, I'm better when you're giving out to me, Mr. Breslin.
I've caught you off guard.
In any...
I must have missed a good point. But it must be worth repeating if Mr. Breslin.
You'll get him to repeat it, I'm sure, Deputy Mayor, in your time. At this point, before I lose my train of thought, PwC come back. They were given terms of reference. They would hope that they would do a fairly good report for $500,000. It's unfortunate that they're repeating what Mazars had said to a great extent, aren't they? Anyway, to stick with the point, they come forward then and they give a conclusion that they'd already given in November through yourselves. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? So the perception of that, and we're looking at governance. Yeah, we're looking at ability to challenge. We're looking at preventing this happening in the future. And Mr. Barry, we're looking forward to you learning to challenge these things so that...
But they retained their independence, and the core of the second task was to do a look-back exercise on the escalation and to review 2,000 documents as they did to try and find out exactly what happened and what were the weaknesses in that. So that was the core of it. As you said, they also threw in a bit about whether you couldn't have done anything different. That, if you like, wasn't in the terms of reference. It was obiter. It was a little bit off the point. They made
a little bit off the point. It was the very point that the government picked out to justify going forward. You don't expect you to comment on that, but that was the official commentary from government. And the PwC have now concluded.
But as I said in my opening statement, the value of the work they've done is in the detailed look back and the identification of weaknesses that we would address going forward, not in the decision which government made for or against.